Hello, and welcome to PowerSpeaking Live. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, the host of this monthly series and the CEO of PowerSpeaking Incorporated. I don't know about you, but the World Cup is all abuzz in my household. My husband is regularly tuned into the games, and he's a volunteer of the games that are being hosted here in the Bay Area at Levi Stadium. So, needless to say, when I sat down to prepare for today's event, soccer was top of mind. And it got me thinking about how goal celebrations, which are a form of communication, have changed over the decades and across generations. For instance, in the 1960s, the theme was very team oriented. Goal celebrations were generally brief, restrained, team oriented, and focused on restarting play. Communication style exhibited collective identity, humility, and emotional restraint. Now, in the 1990s, celebrations became more expressive. The iconic example, Bebeto's Rocking the Baby celebration after scoring for Brazil. They communicated a personal story, family pride, emotion beyond the game. Communication style exhibited more emotional openness, emerging individual identity, and were narrative driven. Fast forward to today, celebrations are heavily influenced by media. Goal celebrations often communicate personal identity and self expression, authenticity and individuality, moments designed to be shared far beyond the stadium. Communication styles exhibit personal brand and visibility, emotional transparency, visual and social storytelling. Now, as I share those examples, I'm sure you see parallels to broader society and the workplace, which is exactly what we're here to talk about today. Each generation is shaped by the world it grows up in, the events they experience, the technology they adopt, the norms they absorb, all influence how they communicate, collaborate, and build relationships. And the challenge isn't that one generation communicates correctly and another incorrectly. The challenge is that we often interpret other communication styles through our own personal lens. Yet, organizations today have something remarkable at their disposal. For the first time in history, four and sometimes even five generations are working side by side. So, if we take the time to understand and appreciate those differences, they serve as a tremendous source of innovation, learning, and stronger collaboration. And joining us today to help explore this fascinating topic is Katherine Jeffrey. Katherine, welcome to Power Speaking Live.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I seriously can't wait to get into this. Now, just a little bit about you. Katherine is the founder of Gen Shift, which uses a research-informed approach to understanding how generations experience work, leadership, and change through keynote speaking, facilitated conversations, consulting engagements, and the Gen Shift podcast. Katherine helps leaders understand what's shaping today's workforce and how to respond with clarity, flexibility, and strong relationships. So, Katherine, I'd love to start out by understanding what got you into this area of expertise.
Great question. I ask myself that sometimes, right? I used to teach leadership development for 10 years at a university, and I'm a Gen Xer, so this is when all the millennials were in college. And every year I would ask my students, what is the best form of leadership? And I gave them three choices: authoritative, democratic, or laissez-faire. And one year they all said laissez-faire leadership. And being the solid Gen Xer that I am, I was like, really? Like, you all think you do you leadership is the best way to lead? And they were like, Yes, and I was like, "Wow, here I am trying to teach effective leadership to a generation who sees it through a completely different lens than I do." So I ended up doing this big qualitative study on millennials and like their view of leadership and teams and had no idea just how relevant it actually like it felt very relevant to me and what I was doing, but had no idea at the time just how the world at large was struggling to really make sense of this as well. And so then I left higher ed and started consulting with a friend of mine and just started to, like, put something together that would make sense to people so that, like 'cause you just see people getting so upset with each other because there's all these misunderstandings, and it's like, how do we start to unpack that? Like, no one's trying to upset the other person, you know? And so how do we start to give it some context and so that compassion and curiosity can follow? And so, yeah, then I'm just trying to keep up ever since then, so
I was going to say that that's another part of the work you do I find so fascinating is that it's constantly evolving. So you're in a field in which you get to continue to learn and modify your thinking and how you teach and help other people to understand it.
Yes, it's not boring.
No, no, not at all. And you talked about assumptions, which is a huge thing. I also think another big factor is expectations. Oftentimes we just unknowingly come into situations expecting that a person is going to communicate or use the form of the communication platform that we prefer. And that's not always the case.
Yes, and I always tell organizations, Brené Brown has that quote, like, "Clear is kind, unclear is unkind." Like, the more you can set clear expectations, I think the more all of these generational issues kinda disappear because now I know how I'm supposed to show up. You've actually taught me. I'm not just operating out of my own paradigm. There's a shared paradigm that we're operating out of, so
Yeah, yeah, no, that's so good because the other thing that I know is often off-putting for some people with relation to this topic is stereotyping, and putting each generation into a particular category, which of course doesn't apply to everybody. So you also can't just make assumptions. This is what I know about this particular generation, so this is what I can expect. An
yeah.
individual might be different than the broader generation they represent.
Yeah, and I always tell people when that comes up, like, think of the generational conversation as a tool in your toolbox. Like a lot of companies do the disc profile or the Enneagram or Myers-Briggs, right? There's all these different assessments. And I kind of think the generation is another lens you can look through. And it might be why you and I aren't communicating well, but it might not have anything to do with it, but it's a place to start and a
Great
place of
point.
understanding to move from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mentioned earlier that each generation is shaped by the world they grow up in. So, I'm curious when you look at boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, what life experiences most shaped how each generation communicates at work?
Yeah, I think, with when it comes to communication, I think technology has a huge part in how we communicate. For boomers, there was the voicemail. You could leave a voicemail, and then Gen X, we got emails. All of a sudden, now I can leave you this electronic mail. Well, now there's Slack and Teams and texting and so younger generations tend to want to use tools that are more efficient. And older generations are like, yeah, but I'm used to sending an email and I like to get that reply. And, I laugh because, older generations and younger generations, just our paradigm around how we use emails it's shifted so much. And that's another thing we have to talk about as we're in the workplace and what are our preferences because there's so many misunderstandings. I also think parenting has a lot to do with how we show up in the workplace and how we choose to communicate. Boomers were told children are to be seen and not heard, and so they brought that into the workplace, right? I am like, I don't need to hear one word from you. I just need to see you doing your job. And Gen Z, they're the first generation to call their parents their best friends, and so they wanna have all kinds of conversations with people, right? And it's a great thing. It's just so different, and so
Yes.
boomers have had to evolve so much because the workplace has changed so, incredibly, like, just in a huge way since they first started.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, after studying and working with multiple generations, what's a truth you've discovered that most people get completely wrong?
Yeah, I think a lot of us think that the generational issues are about age, but I think it's actually about experiences. Like, it's how did the world operate as we were being formed? And then
Mhm,
what was our response to that? So you had boomers who had a lot of institutional trust and career stability. They stayed at their company for their entire career. Gen X, we were known as the latchkey kids, right? So we're highly independent, we're very self reliant. Millennials had a lot of economic uncertainty, and then technology entered their world and turned everybody's world upside down. And then Gen Z has just been constant disruption, and they're also incredibly connected. And so the way that we enter the workplace and our expectations has drastically changed. And I think it has a lot to do. It's not that we as humans are that different, right? It's that the way we've seen the world and the way we first experienced the world is very different.
mhm. Yeah, so true. This morning I was reflecting on this topic and I was thinking about, gosh, it wasn't too long ago when many of my peers were convinced that if their young adult child got tattoos that could be visible, like, on the forearm or the
Yes.
neck, you are completely limiting your career choices, just completely limiting. That wasn't that long ago. And
Yep.
today, I mean, certainly maybe in some workplaces, some environments, but for the most part, that's irrelevant.
Yes. Yes. It's complete and to your point, it's shifted very fast.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really has. It really has. So, what's the biggest misconception each generation tends to have about the other?
I think older generations with younger generations, like, they think they don't wanna work, when really I think they do wanna work, they wanna find purpose in their life, but they wanna work smarter, not harder. And then Gen Z will even talk about it like, boomers were live to work, 12 hours in, first one in, last one out, where Gen Z's kind of like, why work to live? Like they want to enjoy life. They also want to enjoy their job. They understand they spend a lot of hours there, but we've called it work-life balance. I think it's now becoming life-work balance, and the emphasis is more on life. And who doesn't want that, right? I mean, it's not a bad thing. It's just so polar to the way the boomers experience their career, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, I think that's one of the biggest ones, and then I think they also older generations think younger generations, like, they just need too much feedback, because for a boomer world, no news was good news, like, if I'm not getting yelled at, I must be doing something right, and Gen Z, millennials are the first to call their parents their friends, Gen Z, their best friends, and so I'm used to that feedback, I'm used to having someone in my life talking me through things, and I don't always think like it's not necessarily about like affirmation they're looking for. They're looking for efficiency and they want to make sure they're getting it right?
Mhm, mhm.
And then
Yeah,
I
I
think,
love that distinction. It's not necessarily affirmation, the feedback so I can be efficient, work smarter.
yeah. Yeah, and to get to the end where we're going in the best way possible. And then I think for younger generations, look, older generations, it's like they're just resistant to change. They don't wanna do anything differently, and it's like, well, if you've been doing, but that's hard for them to even relate to because their world has changed so fast, where for the boomer world, it was much more consistent and stable, and so when you've done something the same way for decades, and now all of a sudden you're asking me to change, like, you gotta give me some pretty good reason for that, right? And you also gotta give me some time to on-ramp that and get to the other side. And then I think they also think that older generations, they don't like tech or and I think older generations do like tech. They just need to know, is this going to help me improve my life or is this a time sucker? You know, and then I also hear younger generations say like older generations just don't care. And I've had boomers say, "You're right, we don't care." And it's not because boomers don't care about people or care about their relationships, is because when a boomer went to work, they left their feelings at the door and they were there to get a job done, which is very different than what our younger generations are asking for in the workplace with all the health and wellness and empathy. And, you know, they're very proud of bringing mental health awareness into the workplace. And to a boomer, that just didn't exist, and then Gen X is like, "Mental health? What's that?" Like, "We're just trying to survive," you know? I mean, each generation kind of has a different paradigm, so
Yeah. Oh gosh, so many things are flowing through my mind. Oh gosh, it just escaped me. It will come. You just are making me think of so many different examples. It'll come, but our producer, I totally thought of this, the producer that we have on this call is so of the mantra about working smarter. In fact, Andrew, if you get a chance, put in chat. Each year you have a theme, and it's always around that general premise. So if you get a chance, put your theme and your mantra in chat. And he does it. He does it so well. And I work very hard to not work hard. Yeah.
nice. I like that, Andrew.
Yeah. And I learn a lot from Andrew every day on how to accomplish that. By the way, our audience, please join in the conversation. If you have a question or your own perspective that you'd like to share, I really encourage you to do that. So let's get more into some how-to type advice. So for leaders listening, what should leaders know about giving feedback to younger generations that may be different from what worked 20 years ago?
Great question. I think one of the biggest things when Gen Z talks about feedback, they talk about it as an ongoing casual conversation. It's in real time, tell me good or bad, right? And they'll sometimes use the word direct, but when they say direct, it's not the same way as a Gen Xer says direct, right? Gen X is like, shoot it to me straight. You're not gonna hurt my feelings. Like, don't beat around the bush. Tell me what to do. I'll get it done, right? Gen Z is like, tell me good or bad, but be nice about it, right? And that word empathy will come out. They will also say, if you know if you have if in your organization you have quarterly reviews or annual reviews, however you have that structured, they'll say if they go into their quarterly review and you bring up something that happened a month ago that you haven't mentioned to them. I've had Zers quit their job on the spot because now they no longer trust their boss. They feel deceived, right? Like, why didn't you tell me that a month ago? I could have been working on it and getting better at it, and you waited an entire month to do that. Another thing I tell people is I love this. The former coach of the Phoenix Suns used to say when he was coaching his players, he would say, "I'm not calling you out, I'm calling you up." And I've had a lot of Zers say, "We look really confident on the outside, but inside we're not." And so when you call me out, you're just feeding all of that that's already going on. But if you call me up, you're saying I can be more than I am today. And that's the train I really want to be on. Right.
Oh, I
And so
love that.
it's a subtle difference, right? But it can really change the way they receive what you're saying.
Oh, I hadn't heard that before. That is great. Yeah, because I haven't mentioned mentioned it to you, but to our audience, I'm a boomer, and my gosh, decades ago, the process of providing feedback was so much more formal and
Oh,
at very set intervals, right?
yes.
The annual performance review, and yes, you're right. Today, it's
Annual
just
review.
yeah, just tell it to me. Excuse me. And I remember what I was thinking earlier when you were giving some examples. Something that comes to mind that has evolved substantially over the decades is what how we define and think about executive presence, or we like to call it powerful presence because it isn't just reserved for executives.
Yeah.
And, of previous generations, certainly when I was in my formative years of my career, executive presence meant you were buttoned up, didn't reveal what was going on from a personal
Yeah.
standpoint, very measured. Whereas today, I mean, one of the pillars of powerful presence is authenticity and being your true self. And we do a lot of executive coaching with senior leaders, and that's something that they often need a lot of help with, is how to break through the old patterns and show up more as their authentic self, which doesn't mean revealing every personal aspect, right? But it is showing your authentic style and not feeling that you have to adopt a particular persona that may not be genuinely your own.
Yes, I love that. And I think, emotional intelligence is such a strong predictor of your success, not only at work, but also I think in life, right? And I think even as we move into more of an AI era, those people skills and that deeper understanding of who you are and how you show up in the world is just going to be invaluable.
Absolutely, absolutely. And on the subject of AI, how do you see it changing communication expectations across generations?
Yes, it I think AI, like, it starts to level the playing field for everybody, Like, it can help us write better emails, we can create better presentations. It also starts to get rid of all the routine work, so we're spending less time doing all these, minor things and more time on the actual engaging and solving problems, strategic thinking. It can also be like help us with translating communication, so a Gen Zer can walk into a room full of boomer executives and have some really strong points to make, right? And even understanding, what does a boomer expect from me as I walk into this room? How am I to present myself? Because AI will translate across the generations, and really it does that pretty well, actually. And I think to what we were just talking about, the biggest risk with where we are at AI is just losing that human connection, And so continuing to build trust and empathy and having mentorship and those relationships across the generational divide, which I think when you can build a strong relationship with somebody in another generation, it's just pure gold for both people.
So true. So true. In fact, in our most recent newsletter, I wrote an article on flipping the script of mentorship. And because we traditionally, think of the senior uh, professionals mentoring the younger professionals. And yes, that is invaluable. But it's equally valuable for a senior professional to get mentored by a very, very young professional. I mean, like basic things. I'm going to be doing a town hall. How do you, what resonates with you? What do you want to hear me talk about and how to talk about that?
I love that. So reverse mentoring is what you're talking about. And then
Yeah.
there's this whole concept of co-mentoring, where I'm an Xer mentoring the Zer's mentoring me right back for that very reason, right? I have just as much to learn from them. And then I
Mm.
love your last point too. Like, something I'm always telling companies is, when you're having a town hall or you're sending out emails or you're responding to online reviews, like, get that multi-generational team that you trust to speak into it, because the way your message lands on a boomer is not the same way it's going to land on a millennial. And if you're not thinking through that lens, you could really put some people off, right? With no intention of doing that whatsoever, but it just happens.
Exactly. Exactly. One of the golden rules of effective communication, of course, is being very, very audience centric. And we talk a lot about being aware of cultural differences. It's equally important to be aware of generational differences and preferences. Yeah. So, another question, what advice do you have for younger professionals on how to effectively influence senior leaders without appearing overly aggressive or maybe entitled?
I love that question. I would say, as a younger person, always lead with curiosity. So instead of saying, that's not going to work, right? Which can feel very off putting to someone who's older than you, maybe has 10 more, 20 more years of experience, right? Say, help me understand why we've traditionally approached it this way. So now you're asking for my input. You're not just telling me I was flat out wrong, which, by the way, you don't want to hear that either, right? Like, you're actually inviting me into the conversation, because when you're asking questions, that's creating dialogue, right? And then I would say, before you challenge any of the systems you think are archaic, or they just don't make sense to you, I would say, first earn credibility. Like, help people show people that you're reliable. Show them that you're producing results, because influence really grows from building trust. Right, and once that trust is built, now I'm gonna listen to your word a lot more than if you're just someone that's shown up and you're late to half the meetings, and, you don't pick up my phone calls when I call you, and, those kind of things. And then understanding the history of the organization, right? Don't just assume this is where we need to go. Like, there's a reason it is where it is. And try to also offer older generations that empathy and curiosity that younger generations are asking for, so that they can help you understand the bigger context. So,
Oh
and then
gosh, such
the
good advice.
one other thing that just popped in my head that I think is so important, because I hear this so often. Like, Gen Xers are like, if my Gen Zers would just come to me with solutions and not just their thoughts or their observations. Like, actually come to me with something that we can work with. I think that, in the way our workforce is operating today, like, blows older generations away, and they get really excited. So instead of saying, like, this is so broken, right? Like, it's saying, hey, I have some ideas to fix this challenge that's occurring.
Oh, excellent, excellent advice. Another thing that just popped into mind, and this is super, super broad, but any general advice for uh, how, uh, I don't know, uh, in terms of the younger generations, especially if they're being interviewed by me, a boomer, any advice in terms of some critical things to bear in mind in terms of just how you conduct yourself in an interview? And I know that's super broad.
That is. I would say one, this is kind of funny, but not funny. Don't bring your parents. So there is a stat out there that 1 out of 5 companies, or 20%, who are hiring recent college grads, are having parents show up at job interviews. Like, this is real. And so
Oh my
don't bring
God.
your parents. Come on your own. Don't if it's a remote interview, don't have AI feeding you the answers. Like, think on your own, be prepared, put time and effort into it. Come in confident, but also, have your questions, right, about the organization, and don't be, I would say, also, don't be afraid to ask questions, because I think one of the things that happens with Gen Z, if they don't know the expectations and then they come in, they take the job, and then something, all of a sudden you're like, well, you need to work 1 Saturday a month. They're like, oh, no, 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 no. You did not tell me this, And so ask those questions about the things that really matter to you, so that you can get as much information as possible, because that boomer or Gen Xer might just have forgotten to tell you, right? And so what are your values? Making sure your values are aligned.
Okay, wonderful. Oh gosh, great advice. You're making me think of a friend of mine. He works at, I think, San Francisco State in an operational type role and has a team of employees, a few that are very young. One of his employees, when she's going to be out sick, he gets a call from the mom to explain that. So
Yeah.
I'd advise against that as well.
Yes. Yes. Do not have your parents involved.
Period. Period.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is another for leaders. If a leadership team wanted to become more generation inclusive over the next 90 days, what 3 actions would you recommend?
Let's see. The first one would be just increase people's generational awareness. Like, there's research out there that says that, like, less than 50% of companies even think about age when they think about diversity, and over 95% aren't doing a thing about it. And so and there've been
Wow.
case studies done where if you bring in generational awareness, it can increase your productivity by, like, 30%. Right, because there's all these things going on underneath the surface that is or it's frustrating people, and people know it's happening, but they don't ever talk about it, or they're afraid to talk about it. Like, I was doing a session a few weeks ago, with a company, and, halfway through the session, this Gen X boss is sitting by her millennial employee, and the millennial looks at the Gen Xer and she says, "Your text messages are so aggressive." And the Gen Xer's like, "What are you talking about?" And so what happened in that moment, though, for the whole room, right? Now they could laugh about it. They could actually have a real conversation about what the Gen Xer was doing that was bothering the millennial, right? And now they could together, because they clearly had a good relationship, but there was still this tension going on, right? And so by bringing that generational awareness, having conversations, learning to be more clear, and then also having more like a bigger sense of humor when it comes to all this, because if you keep getting upset, it's not going to help anybody. But if we can laugh and go, I always talk about it as if we think about the generations as if they were different cultures, right? If I go to India tomorrow, I'm not going to wear the same clothes, right? I'm going to carry myself differently. I'm not going to smile at strangers, right? There's certain things I've learned. I go there every year. Um and I'm constantly taking in their culture. Well, if we think about the different generations in that same light, and again, back to what we said earlier, we're growing up in a totally different time. The world's operating in a different way. So we're coming into the workplace looking through a different lens and speaking a different language. And if we never stop to recognize that, if I go to India and just try to be an American, I am gonna get very frustrated. I'm gonna get very frustrated because 'cause they're not gonna when they say yes to me, they go like this, right?
You're going to get frustrated and you're probably going to offend a lot of people.
Yes, and I'm gonna think, "Is anyone even getting me?" Because I'm not willing to get them, right? And
Yes.
so I
Yeah.
think we have to move toward one another rather than I think there's a lot of pointing the finger that
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. You said some really compelling statistics. Did you say roughly 90% of organizations aren't doing anything about increasing generational awareness?
Yep,
And yet, if you do take the time to understand, appreciate, and collaborate more effectively, it can increase productivity by up to 30%.
yep,
That's staggering. So,
right?
can you offer more concrete ways that organizations, leaders can increase generational awareness?
Yeah, well, I think one, having conversations, doing sessions, getting like I think sometimes it helps to bring someone in,
Mhm.
right? Because then it's not you telling them, right? It's somebody from the outside who can kind of come at it from a little bit different direction, Um
Like you.
yeah, exactly. um and then to create intentional space for cross-generational conversations. What does it look like that the reverse mentoring, the co-mentoring? How can we or even create events where we're getting together or you're putting people in different kinds of groups, because again, if I don't understand Gen Zers and I'm like, why won't they do this? The more I spend time with the Gen Zers, I'm like, they are amazing. The things they bring into the workforce are phenomenal. And they're actually bringing this beautiful spark. And I swear it's like pixie dust. And if we just let it sprinkle on us instead of trying to blow it all away, I think there's some incredible things that could happen in the workplace.
Yes. Oh, so well said. We have a question from Alex Koss, off topic. What is a good mnemonic device to help remember the order of all these generations?
Oh, well, Alex, that's a great question. So first, the traditionalists is or when the war was going on, so mnemonic device. Well, this will help. Okay, traditionalists, then the boomers. There were so many men coming back from the war, so they had all these babies, right? So that's the baby boomer generation. So traditionalist or silent generation, then the boomer generation. Then it gets really easy after those two. Okay, it goes X, Y, Z. So Y is also millennial, but millennial is what really stuck. So X, Y, Z, then alpha. They started the alphabet over, and then 2025 has been declared as the first year of the next generation, which is Gen Beta. And that is because of all this AI that's happening. So their experience of the world is going to be totally different than all of us that have gone before them. So really, if you can get X, Y, Z, A, B, you're doing great. And then remember traditionalists with the war, and then they came home and they had a bunch of babies, and the baby boomers came to be.
Love that. Love that. That's so helpful. And I have to share just another personal example back to how things are changing so rapidly, at a much rapid rate. I was having dinner with my son, who recently graduated from his master's program, 25, and my nephew, who was also 25. Both of them were talking about how their experience as TAs, working with
Yeah.
undergrad. And
Yeah.
my 25-year-old nephew said that the undergrads were calling him Unc.
Oh, oh no. But the rest of us are in big trouble then.
Yeah. Like, Beck, if you are Unc, I might as well just give up.
Did he say why? Like, what was so different
No,
between them?
he didn't. He
That's
didn't.
so
But uh
interesting.
uh Parker, if you could think of an example, put it in chat. And thank you, Alex, for that question. If any of you else listening have questions or comments, please let us know.
Great.
Um, so kind of on the vein of Unc, what are some phrases, habits, or communication behaviors that unintentionally create generational distance?
Okay, this is like one of my favorite questions to talk about because everybody's always like, "Oh, I didn't know." The one thing I think that happens a lot is older generations will call Gen Zers kiddo because they think they're talking to their own kid kinda, and Gen Z obviously hates that. Like, "Please don't call me kiddo in the workplace," right? Another one is the thumbs up emoji. Are you aware of this, Carrie?
No, and I
So
do thumbs up.
yes, when you do the thumbs up emoji, what are you saying? If you sent that to
Great
me, what would you
job.
right.
Awesome.
Good job, awesome, got it, okay, whatever, right? Younger generations will say that this emoji is actually very passive aggressive and sarcastic. It's kind of like, and I had a group of millennials, younger millennials, the other day, they said, Catherine, that's the new FU. Like they really don't like that emoji.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I had learned something very important just now.
Right? Another one is my Gen Z employee sends me a text, I can like their text or I can love their text. Now, often if I like their text, they're kind of like, I must not have gotten something right. If I love their text, they're like, yes, I nailed it. Now I'll have boomers, same team, same company, who are like, Catherine, I would never love someone's text in the workplace. Like, that's completely inappropriate, right? So, again, same platforms, but we're speaking a different language. And then another one I love is the dot, 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 or what we know as the ellipsis, right? Now,
Mhm.
many of us use that in our emails and our text messages. And for most of us, or for, I should say, for older generations, it is a pause. Seinfeld would have said yada, 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 right? I'm not emotionally communicating anything to you. Well, younger generations will say that that dot, dot, dot causes them a lot of anxiety because they're like, what is Carrie not saying? And then they immediately go to, what am I doing wrong? Okay.
Wow. Wow. Oh, that there's so much there. And again, back to just gaining awareness, understanding, being curious. And another thing I thought of when you were talking about actions leaders can take to create a more generational inclusive workforce, you mentioned expectations. And I think that is so, so important. Something as basic as having documented communication standards within an organization. Because, I may think it's completely understood that you need to respond to all emails within a 24-hour period. Well, for a lot of younger generations, they don't even like to communicate through email, let alone
Correct.
regularly be looking in your inbox. But if
Correct.
that's an expectation, make it clear, make it
Yeah.
understood.
Yes. Exactly. And I think too, like, starting with just auditing, how are you communicating? And is everything, is it in a Gen X world? Or are there some things where you're reaching your Zers or your millennials? Are you only communicating in one way, or are you offering different opportunities that
Yeah,
feel better for different generations, right? Because I think that matters, because I don't feel like I have a voice, right? Or I'm always adjusting to everybody else and no one really sees me and what's important to me. So I think looking at
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I brought up the example earlier about getting input from multiple generations on how to effectively conduct your town halls. Well, town halls might not be the best forum, period. I mean,
Yeah.
that's one. That's
Yes.
one, but it shouldn't be the only way.
Yes, and I wanna share with you something. So I did, some focus groups for a large international company. They did the corporate surveys, and their scores with their under 35-year-olds were going down. So I always tell people, when you're doing corporate surveys, make sure you're looking through a generational lens at those results, because you can miss some really big insights if you don't. Well, one of the things that came out of that was town hall meetings. Okay. And what the under 35-year-olds were saying was, I get why you do that. Like, it's an efficient way to disseminate a lot of information. However, if you're going to tell me something that I don't like, or someone in my pod that I'm part of doesn't like, they often form these pods of Gen Zs, and they're like, I'd much rather hear that directly from my manager, because I want to, in real time, ask questions. I want to process my feelings. I want to gain a bigger context. And if you don't do that, if you don't allow me that, guess what I'm doing in that moment? Right? I'm communicating with my pod, letting them know how I feel about it. And all of a sudden that CEO said something. They're maybe even not even finished their full sentence, and they've created a firestorm, and they had no idea that was coming. Right? And so the more you can communicate, I think, directly with Gen Zs and help them process the change, rather than just it feeling like it's coming out of nowhere and they're just supposed to accept it. I think, the much better, like, the results will be from that information and from the change that's occurring, or whatever the topic is.
It's so critical. And you mentioned change. That's what I was thinking about with regard to change management and where often companies go so very, very wrong and how critical, because I recently had a live focused on change management, and we were talking about, what trying to remember the exact, but basically, what is an example of something that we often overlook? And it's often really bringing those frontline leaders into the conversation and making sure that first and foremost, before senior leaders even start cascading the message, that the frontline leaders are in the conversation, that they truly understand it, that they have the opportunity to get their questions answered, their concerns and objections understood, so that to do just what you're talking about, they can effectively have the conversation with their direct reports and contextualize it and provide open space for them to ask questions, share their concerns, etc.
Yeah. Yes, it's so important. And, I think about like the Gen X, more boomer style is like, well, here's what we're going to do. We just kind of go through it and everybody goes, okay. And, we might push back. Gen X might push back a little bit more than boomers, right? But we still tend to move with that. Where millennials, again, as you get into that big shift in parenting, where now you're my friend and now my best friend, like I'm used to asking questions. I'm used to my thoughts and feelings actually mattering and for people taking them very seriously. And so I want to feel like I have space to voice that and that you're actually going to respond. And it's not that I expect you to do everything that I'm saying, but I do want you to hear because I think that I have valuable things to say.
Yeah, absolutely. We have some input from Melinda Henning. Vocal fry seems to be universal among the younger generations. Yet, as speaking and vocal coaches, we advise training to bring the voice into more pleasing resonance for vocal health, for credibility, at least to boomers, and for an easier sound to receive. And we often face resistance to this coaching. Excellent. Oh, Melinda, I am so glad you brought this up. I have to just add something very, very quickly. I was having a conversation with my sister recently with regard to a particular podcast that we love. And we admitted to each other that there are very few women on this podcast that we like, we find them just completely off-putting, and it was causing us to question, is there a bias that I'm not aware of? And, we came to realize, because these are younger women, and
Yeah.
all of them communicate with that vocal fry, and we just instantly find it super, super off-putting and can't even get past that to the actual word and content. So, all that to be said, what's your advice?
No, I mean, I think that's it. Melinda's saying it like how, yeah. Oh, well, then she's saying what to do. I thought she was making a statement, like, because I'm like, yeah, it makes
No,
sense.
yeah, so yeah, Melinda's saying, as speech coaches, we often advise uh, younger generations to try to eliminate that vocal fry because it can be so abrasive and off-putting, but we're greeted with resistance. Like, what are you talking about? That's how I communicate. So what advice do you have?
Gosh, my first thought, I've never even thought about this before. So this is interesting. My first thought is, do they like listening to people at that same pitch, right? Or that same tone or, whatever it is. And like, do they find that pleasing? Um, and then helping them understand that, maybe having them listen to a boomer talk, a Gen Xer talk, a millennial talk, and say, this is what people are used to. This is what they respond to. And the way this is coming out feels a little off for them. And so if you want a bigger audience, if you're trying to reach people who are different than you, it might help to shift and adapt. But you have to remember with younger generations, if you don't unpack that why, they're not going to do it. Like Gen X is the first to start asking why. Gen Z, if they don't know the why, they just won't do it. And I think it's fair. I think we all want to know why, right? It's helpful. But a lot of us didn't grow up in that same kind of world. And so we can get a little impatient when we have to explain the why. And so I think giving them concrete examples and experiences into the contrary can help you further get down that path.
Great, great advice. And that's hearkening back to that great quote. I'm not calling you out, I'm calling you up.
Yes. Yes.
You want to be received. You want to have a positive impact. If that's your goal,
Yes.
then let me help you to understand how to reach more people.
Exactly. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Just do it your way? You can do that, but yeah, you're gonna miss a lot of people along the way. Yeah.
Great, great, great advice. And thank you so much, Melinda, for that question. All right, just a few more. What communication habit can every listener start using tomorrow that will make them more effective with colleagues of any age?
Mhm. It's another great question. I think the number one thing that comes into my mind is to replace all the assumptions and the biases that we have with actual curiosity. Right? So instead of, like, in your head, like, "Why would you do that?" Right? That's what a lot of us do, like, "Why are they doing that? I don't get them." Say, "I wonder what's driving that behavior." Like, what has shifted their perspective, or what paradigm are they operating out of that, that they're thinking they're approaching this differently, right? So curiosity then builds a bridge instead of leaving us pushing each other further and further apart. So, um, before you react in that situation, like, what am I assuming? What am I missing? What is a question I can ask to further understand what this different paradigm that this person is operating out of?
So instead, the first example I thought of, because I must confess, I do really try to lead with curiosity. And I also can have strong opinions about certain things and come into the situation with judgment. So the extreme example, if I have an employee show up to a performance review with his mom, I'll seek to understand what is it that caused you to think this would be appropriate, and why is it that you
Yes.
I'm using a tone, of course.
Yes, 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 yes. Yes, yes, yes.
Yes,
You know,
so
I'm
even that.
I'm glad you brought up performance reviews because I think that's actually a perfect example. Um, but let me shift it to a millennial and a boomer. So the boomer is giving the millennial their annual review. Halfway through the review, the millennial starts giving the boomer feedback. Well, this doesn't often go over very well with baby boomers because I'm the boss. I give you feedback. You do not give me feedback. Well, the millennials sitting there going, well, I did not wake up this morning hoping I would blow my performance review. They're like, that's not what I wanted to do. And then they're thinking, I wasn't even trying to be disrespectful. I was just trying to have a back and forth conversation just like I would with my parents. And then they start to think, really? You don't want my feedback? Because I can help you be a better leader. Like, I'm the one that follows you. And millennials and Gen Z have this incredible growth mindset, right? They want to be their best selves wherever they are, whatever they're doing. And they don't understand why you don't share that. Right? And so that, and if you don't recognize in that moment, they're actually not being disrespectful. That's not what they're trying to do. They're operating out of a different paradigm. If I don't take time to stop and go, if I react, I might lose that incredibly wonderful employee. But if I give myself time to understand, okay, they're not trying to upset me. They obviously they don't want to do that. This is a performance review. Why would they want to upset me, right? And we actually give them some space and grace so that we can get up to speed with where they are. It can really change the dynamic and the relationship.
Great example, and to your point, one, you may risk losing this talented employee, and you're also missing out on some feedback that could be immensely valuable. Immensely.
Absolutely.
Great
Absolutely.
example. All right, in closing, if you could leave our audience with one message about communicating across generations, what would it be?
I would say generational differences aren't really the problem. The problem is that we stop being curious about each other. And as we said, every generation has something to teach, learn, and to contribute. So when we actually approach each other with curiosity instead of judgment, our communication gets better, our teams get stronger, and then really everybody wins, including our clients, our customers, right? It's a win-win-win for everybody when we build those bridges and we seek understanding. So,
Thank you, Catherine, so much. This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I personally am not ever going to use the thumbs up gesture again. Thanks to you. And thank you to our audience. You raised some great questions, and I urge you all to tune in next month for our next issue or episode of Power Speaking Live. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Tune into the World Cup if you haven't already.